Shane, welcome to the Thrive in Wabash County podcast.
Hey, thanks. You know what's really difficult is that you both have a name that starts with A, and I'm horrible at remembering people's names. When I see you, I'm like, is it Alex or Adam?
Somebody called me Alex the other day. We were in the same room. I took it as a compliment.
Yeah.
Somebody called me Adam. I would take it as a compliment as well.
Right. You'd be like, are my abs showing?
Shane, I appreciate you joining us today. First and foremost, we'd be remiss to not thank you for helping us get here, right, to launch the podcast. You've been a huge help. And as we were talking and I was thinking through who my first episode was going to be, who better to start with than you, and heard a little bit about your story and obviously your podcast career, which I'm sure we'll get into, but even your role with Downtown Wabash. And so excited to touch on a little bit of all of that today. And Adam was excited to join us today as well. So appreciate you being willing to jump on with us.
Can I also say that the entire podcasting training that I've been helping you with and all the setup and stuff has been so fun for me. I didn't know either of you very well. And I just feel like now we're all very good friends. And so I love that there's been two really great friendships that's developed out of just helping people set up their own project, which I do a lot. But it's been great to getting to know both of you.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks for inviting me to join you today on your episode. And likewise, it's been really fun to learn all of this new equipment and what it takes from the early days of when we thought we would just record on a cell phone and post it. But
well, you know, I get asked a lot to help people and businesses create their podcasts and set it up. And it's amazing for me every time to hear something like that, because when all of you are listening and watching, you're probably thinking, oh, it'd be cool to have a podcast for my business, but you don't always know what goes into it. And even when you're watching the film here or you see pictures of this studio, you just think, wow, that's really put together. It looks so simple. But what you don't see are all of the cords that Adam has aligned perfectly behind the couch and underneath tables and under carpets. All of these things you put out of sight for a good reason. But I think in the mind of the listener or watcher, it kind of makes it look a little easier. But we know how much time it takes and all the energy, the thought. And I was in this room with all of you as you were putting it together. It's a testament to the devotion that you have to have.
we were really lucky and thankful that we got to use your experience, because it's going to take work no matter if it's the first time or the 100th time.
Yeah.
But we were able to learn from you and know what equipment to purchase, and we didn't have to go through those growing pains. We leaned on you and you were right there for us. So thank you. Maybe that's a great opportunity for you to tell us a little bit about why you're sitting in that chair over there and how you have so much experience about podcasting.
Well, I've been podcasting since 2008. Very early days of podcasting. I didn't know what it was called at that time. I've put together 40-something seasons for my crime podcast, which is Foul Play. About 150, 160 history podcast episodes for Hometown History. And a little bit more than 100 episodes for the Mystery Inc. podcast that I do. In addition to all of those podcasts that I personally am involved in, I also own a company that's called Black Label Podcasts. And altogether, that network owns 11 podcasts. I went to IEP Live for Forensics. When I get there, that freshman year, I loved it. I love learning things. One of my only good friends that I had made had gotten attacked on campus. It was a sexual assault. After that happened to her, the university sent out a text message to students explaining there was a crime that happened on campus, on this part of campus at this time. No other details was given. And in that moment, I realized that I had been getting these text messages for a while of these random crimes on campus. I assumed people dropped something, missed it, and they weren't sure if it was, I didn't know. Until you have a violent crime happen to you or someone, it's out of your realm of possibility. And that was out of my realm of possibility. But I recognized when it happened to my friend, that could be what these other text messages were. And so I started being able to track some of the other ladies down. It wasn't just impacting the students at our school, it was also impacting some of the nurses at Riley Hospital for Children, which was right next to campus. I knew the crimes would continue, and I didn't want that for anyone else who didn't have to go through it. And because in that moment I now knew what happened, I felt almost a duty to do something about it. I think a normal person would probably contact their parents. At least that's what my mind would think, learning from people who have great parents. I'll contact my parents and they'll help me figure the situation out. I couldn't do that. So what I did was I asked, how can I help in this situation? I knew I had to do something. I was one person and I was terrified of getting kicked out of school because this is how I'm not homeless. But I knew I just couldn't sleep the next day without doing something. Throughout the entire process, I'm terrified of being kicked out of school. My chemistry professor was recording his lectures and releasing them as a podcast. We didn't know that. He didn't know that's what it was called. He would record them and then he would put them on iTunes and send them to us. And so I knew that's what he was doing. And so I thought back to Unsolved Mysteries and Robert Stack, and I remembered those experiences and that they always made me pay attention to those crime stories. And I used that little bit of knowledge I had that I could create something that people can listen to and hear what's happening. When I spoke to these ladies, it drew out my emotions and I knew I had to do something. And I was hoping that it would do the same for students, and that if they heard it, maybe someone would know something. But more importantly, I wanted people to be aware so they could make better decisions, not go out alone at night. So I went to the chemistry professor after class one day and I said, hey, do you mind showing me how you're recording and uploading these? And he's like, yeah, sure, come when I'm done with class today and I'll show you. And he showed me. That was my podcasting 101 lesson. At that time, you didn't have MP3s. It was a whole different type of audio file, and you could upload it straight to iTunes and it would push it out to Apple Podcasts.
Were you editing at all, or were you just doing a straight recording and then just...
It would be straight recording. It would be horrific for someone to listen to
that
now.
Podcasting 101 lesson probably looks a little different than the 101 lesson we got in Shane's state-of-the-art new podcast 2 studios.
Yes. And in fact, when you start in podcasting and you don't have a good resource, you just do whatever you have to do it. And so I used the built-in mic on my laptop. And back then, built-in mics on your laptop were horrific. I would never let anyone listen to anything like that. So that's what I did. I was recorded on that and I pushed it out into a series of episodes to talk about what was going on campus. I published it onto iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and then I published that onto the bulletin for the students to find. I didn't know it was called a podcast. I thought that this was only available to our university, and that was the end of it. I didn't ever think anything more of these audio files that I was creating. I quickly learned that this was a podcast and that people outside the university could hear it and listen. I'd never figured out who was committing that crime. Never figured it out. My best guess is it could have possibly been a student who had no prior background, which they wouldn't have his DNA at that point on file. But the crime stopped. They suddenly stopped, which now I feel like the person may have listened and thought, if I don't stop, I'm going to get caught, and this is all going to be a huge deal now. Mm-hmm. But also I think that a piece of it was that you're able to make better decisions for yourself if you know all the facts. Just as with a business or running a nonprofit, if you don't have all the facts, you can't make the best decision. And so for these students, they now knew these crimes were happening. And they wouldn't go out alone at night. They always had a friend with them. And you'd be amazed by how effective that is. When a coward like that will come out of the darkness to attack someone. So I did that whole thing to help, to solve a problem. And that was the sole purpose. It was never to create a podcast. It was never to make a career out of it. It was solely, that was all I could think of to do.
You had a message to share.
I had a message to share, yes.
Are those podcasts, original episodes, out there in the universe anywhere?
They are not. No. They are not. At some point in time, Apple Podcasts had upgraded their systems, and you could do a lot more on Apple Podcasts now. And throughout that process, I don't recall if I deleted them or if they were removed when the system was updated. But I never saved those files, so I don't have a copy. They may be out in the wilderness. Maybe Steve Jobs his ghost will send Cook a little SOS and they'll be able to find it someday. I don't know.
So you put those out there and you had some listeners.
Yeah.
Was the message shared? You said you put it out on a bulletin, but did it gain traction in like other media highlighted the podcast, or the university police department, or anybody else grab a hold of that and help?
I don't think that the university was happy that I did it. A very common thing for many universities is that when you have violent crimes happening on campus, they want to keep that under wraps. Not that they're trying to hide it. I'm not trying to say that. What I'm saying is, and it makes sense if you think about it, you want your students to feel safe. It may impact their willingness to be on campus, and it may impact parents' willingness to send their students to the school. So there's a lot of things that go into it, but I know that the school was not happy that I did it. They didn't kick me out, thankfully. They may have assumed that I had a family who would have fought back and would have contacted the media. They could have kicked me out and I would have nowhere to go and I would have ended up on the street. So I'm thankful that they didn't.
Thank goodness you did do the podcast and tell the story, because the students started traveling with friends at night and everything. They were keeping people safe.
It stopped what was happening, which was the goal. I wanted that to happen. A lot of unexpected things happened in that one action. I created the first crime series podcast. It was the first sole crime podcast. There were 2 podcasts out at the time who did cover true crime, but it wasn't solely what they had done.
And not to age you here or your podcasting career, but what year would this have been, roughly?
It was 2008.
Okay.
Fall of 2008. Life after that goes quick. Unfortunately, a lot of those crimes happen in a lot of places around the world. And after I created the first series, suddenly another family contacted me. Hey, Shane, I heard that you created those episodes. Would you be willing to tell my loved one's story? Would you help us tell that story? How do you say no? I've never been able to. So I have more than 40 seasons. Each season is its own unsolved case based on these horrific stories that happen to everyday people. It's hard. I've wanted to stop all the time. It weighs on me a lot. The podcast stories that I tell on Foul Play always pull me into depression. I have lost faith in humanity many times, not just because of the experiences that I went through, but because I have to relive what these people went through in their worst time. And it's also hard for me to see people in pain. I know what it's like to be in pain and to hurt and to feel too much. And I don't like that for people. And when I work with people and families, detectives on Foul Play, I always get dragged to that point.
Shane, real quick, just for the listeners, now podcasts are much more popular than they were back in 2008 when you started. Adam and I have had the benefit of seeing your podcast studios and some of the awards and things like that. But just for perspective for the listeners, this being a brand new startup podcast, talk about Foul Play and how big of a podcast and big of a deal it is.
Yeah. Unexpectedly throughout my entire life, podcasting was a blessing. It allowed me to get out of the situation I ended up in. I never did it to make money, to make a career out of it. I didn't know that it was a podcast, but it's been such a huge blessing. I've been able to tell all of these stories to people all over the world. On any given month, I have more than 1 million people who will listen to a story that I tell. And that's unfathomable to me. You'll notice if you ever listen to an episode of Foul Play or Hometown History, I always start out every episode by saying, hello, friend. And it's important for me because as I developed a big listening base, like, I don't interact with these people. They listen to me and they think they know me based on my narration of these stories. But after a while, I knew that there would be people listening who are also experiencing hard times that I have gone through. I started doing that because I know what it's like to not have a friend. If I would have had that friend, life would have been a lot easier. And life is easy when you have friends. And so when I say that to people when they listen, they don't know the reason why, but I say it because I want them to be my friend, because I know what it's like to not have them. And I also know that a lot of people have their own struggles in life and they feel a lot. And maybe in that moment when you hear me address you, hello, friend, you feel like you have someone there in your corner. That was the hope, and that's why I did it. Another secret that I've never shared is that the intro music on Foul Play is a mixture of two different songs. The first one is the Golden Girls theme song, Thank You for Being a Friend. And it's mixed with Hello Darkness, My Old Friend. When you listen to that, it gives you a slight emotion. I feel like you won't be able to tell like how you feel in that moment when you hear it. But a piece of it is a dark song about darkness, but then also thank you for being a friend. So it's just a mixture, I feel like, of my life anthem.
Yeah.
That you have to have a friend in that darkness if you want to get out. But that's a little secret that I've never shared.
So as a podcast host, you can really do that from anywhere in the world. You were doing it in Indianapolis when you first started.
Mm-hmm.
What brought you? I know you mentioned your wife was from this area. You guys could really live anywhere though. Why choose Wabash?
After I met my wife, my Norwegian friend flew in for the first time to America. I picked her up from Indianapolis and I let her know in that moment, Maya, we're going to Wabash, Indiana, because I've arranged for a history podcast episode to be recorded there. So she came with me and I met with TJ Honeycutt at the museum. And he told us the story of the arc light, of why Wabash was the first electrically lit city in the world. And I remember just thinking, you're an hour and a half away from where I live, and I never knew that. Never knew a lot of the other history that I learned that day. It was such a fascinating episode. After we left the museum, Maya and I started walking downtown because we thought, oh my gosh, Market Street, it's so beautiful. Let's just take a quick walk. We came across Modoc's, went in for coffee. After coffee, we saw Market Street Grill was open. We went in and ate and walked around and just fell in love with the little town. And unknown to me in that moment, this was Maya's first experience with an American small city. That impacted her because now she thought all American small towns are like what Wabash looks like. They have what we have. Well, that full month that she was with me, we were traveling for stories. In each town we went to, very similar in size, didn't have what Wabash had. They didn't give you that feeling that Wabash gives you when you're walking around these beautiful buildings. And even though if you don't know the history, you know something cool happened here. Like, why else would these things be here? There's all these old signs that you just come across and you realize a lot of history happened here. You want to know more. But those towns didn't all have that. They didn't have a Modoc's. They didn't have a Market Street Grill. They didn't have a museum. They didn't have a Honeywell Center. And later, when my wife and I were talking about getting married and where we wanted to live, I brought back this saying that Maya and I developed on that trip, which was, my wife asks, where would you want to live? She's bringing up these big cities. And I say, Alicia, those aren't Wabash, which is exactly what Maya and I would say. We would go to these small towns and we would say, well, we're not in Wabash anymore. So because of that, we were talking about where we want to live, and I talked her into staying in her hometown of Wabash.
And I can understand from her perspective, she grew up here and you see things differently when you're young.
Yeah.
But Wabash did go through a transformation in about that same time frame that she would have been gone. Charlie Creek Inn was revitalized, and what a cornerstone that made an impact a lot. The investment of Richard Ford, he also played a big impact in the museum that you mentioned. So I can understand her perspective of Wabash, because it wasn't the same Wabash that she grew up in.
Yeah.
But this is a full circle moment, because now you're now involved in Wabash, not just as a citizen, but you're truly impacting what's happening in Wabash.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about your role at Downtown Wabash?
Yeah. So when I moved here, I, of course, brought my media company with me. Most of my employees work remotely, which is ideal. And I quickly wanted to be a part of something. I wanted to get involved. I knew there was this energy in Wabash, and I wanted to be a piece of it. And so I would meet with business owners and learn things about them, and still have this hunger to be involved. I love volunteering. And like I said before, I don't want people to struggle. And so I want to make sure that I do things to prevent that. At some point in time, I was asked to join the board of Downtown Wabash, Inc. At the time, it was Marketplace. And joining the board, you have a lot of ability to help the downtown and those small businesses. The organization puts together First Friday events, the farmers market, but they're also working hand in hand with small, medium, and large businesses in the whole city to ensure that the downtown is thriving, so that when another Shane Waters comes to town, he'll fall in love with this town too and want to invest. I was so excited to get onto the board, because I knew, like, if it wasn't for the organizations like this, I never would have fell in love with the town, and I wouldn't have moved here. I would be in a different place, and I don't like that thought. So I want to do my part. I want to give back and allow that to happen again. I also love history. There's so much history here. And so a piece of it too, getting involved, is I want to make sure that 50, 100 years from now, when the next Shane Waters comes to town, he's going to see something that we're doing today and want to know more about it. And it's going to make him want to move here because of what we did 50 or 100 years ago, just like how I felt when I came here.
Shane, you said it a little bit ago, just that Downtown Wabash, it is different. It is hard to put words to it, right? How you feel when you're walking in downtown. And the work that you just described of Downtown Wabash, Inc. is so critically important in the larger picture for Wabash County, right? In reversing population decline and all of those things. For a rural community to be successful and becoming a place that people want to move home to or move to as their next home, like you did and like we all did as a transplant, what the critical piece of that is a downtown, right? A vibrant downtown. Never going to be Fort Wayne, never going to be Indianapolis. We don't want to be those things, right? But for a rural community, continuing to build on the amenities that we do have, and even in our smaller communities across the county. Adam, you talked back in the 2014, 2015 timeframe when Downtown Wabash started to see this revitalization that was going on at that point in time. I believe has been a ripple effect across all of Wabash County. By Downtown Wabash becoming vibrant, you now see 10 years later the impact that revitalization has had, that revolution's had on the rest of Wabash County. And Shane, to your point that you brought up of the work that you're interested in, you do every single day now to keep Downtown Wabash thriving so that years from now that it's still this vibrant place. What does that look like? What is next for Downtown Wabash?
What's really interesting is people who have lived here for a long time, I hear a lot from them saying just that 10, 20 years ago, Wabash didn't look or gave you the same feeling what you get when you come here today. And in some way, I feel like it could have the ability to negatively impact progress. It's important to have a lot of momentum, but the moment that people start thinking, oh, I can't get any better than this, that momentum will slow down. If you look closely in the downtown district, you'll see a lot of pockets, a lot of room where we need to grow. A lot of buildings have been restored. There are a lot more who still need help. Same way with those businesses in downtowns. It's so important for small businesses to stay in a downtown district. But in order for them to stay in business, they need the spaces next to them filled. There has to be something for people to come to downtown to go from one business to the next and then to the next. The moment that there is a space in between those businesses, it will prevent that traffic from flowing. You can see that in some places in our downtown. It's easy to look past it if you know where Wabash was 10, 20 years ago, because it's so much better, but there's a lot of room for growth. For example, Canal Street has a big issue, a big area for improvement. There's a lot of buildings, spaces, and storefronts that are empty, and that impacts those businesses on Canal. The moment that you start having those businesses go out because they're not getting enough traffic, that will further a problem and it will escalate it. And once it escalates, it's hard to get it to stop. Back in the late 70s and 80s, when Wabash declined, the downtown was declining, it was because malls and strip malls were popping up, and that would push people out to these stores, and they weren't coming downtown anymore. It wasn't convenient for them anymore. And that has a huge impact. Those businesses can't stay in business. Suddenly you have an empty storefront, you have an empty building. The building owner can't pay for the taxes for that building anymore because they can't get someone to move into it. The building starts to fall into disrepair because the building owners can't pay for the upkeep. It's so expensive to maintain historic old buildings. And it is crazy expensive to invest the money into them, to restore them. In order to do it, you have to have a vibrant downtown where people want to come to, explore, and shop and stay. In the moment that you start experiencing businesses going out, the next business going out, it has the impact and the ability to get to that moment of the 70s and 80s. And that's what our organization and many of the others here is trying to prevent. We were founded in 81, which was a turning point. They founded it in order to prevent further decline of the buildings, to get businesses into downtown, and they knew that they had to get people to come. And so when you look at the things that we are doing, it's so easy to think, oh, Downtown Wabash Inc., they're the ones that do the farmers market and First Friday. Those are the big events that we put on, and that's what people see. But there's a lot of importance behind those events, behind the scenes. First Friday, for example, we're pulling sometimes a couple thousand people in a 3-hour window to downtown. That's bringing people who can shop, who can buy, who can stay. More than that, it gets your community to fall in love and remind them why they should come downtown. Mm-hmm. And so you have to have the buy-in of the community. You have to have them reminded and value the downtown for them to want to see the downtown succeed. So although you could come on a First Friday and you think, oh, this is that Downtown Wabash thing that they put together so people will come downtown, but there's a lot of thought that goes into it. And so as First Fridays and the farmers market changes slightly and improves, that's always my mindset. I want the biggest impact that I can. I want more people to appreciate it, to come downtown, fall in love with it. I want those small businesses to benefit because most of the small businesses on First Friday will make the money so they can stay open. If there is a bad First Friday, if we don't do our responsibility to make a good event, that can put that business out. And then that can start a ripple effect. So there's a lot of risk that's involved, which is why I try to pinpoint areas that I can improve. But there's just so much that goes behind the scenes, goes into it, that you probably wouldn't just think about by coming to one of these events.
Shane, you talked a little bit about the geography of downtown Wabash. You have 2 anchor institutions really on the core of the downtown, right? You have the Wabash County History Museum on one side, which for a community of our size is unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
And all the great programming and work that the team continues to do at the History Museum. But on the other end of that other anchor being the Honeywell Center, if you don't mind, talk a little bit about the impact of all the great work and programming that the Honeywell Center has on the other businesses in downtown.
Yes, I am not familiar with any other town our size having a Honeywell Center. Mr. Honeywell, his kindness to have the Honeywell Center put here is unbelievable to me. You have a lot of successful people in the world who make a lot of money, and they go live in Hawaii and you never hear from them again. But Mr. Honeywell wanted to benefit the community that he grew up in. How kind of a person. Like, I wish that I could have met him. Him and Richard Ford are two people that I would have loved to have met. But he had the kindness to do that for our community. And it leaves a huge impact. It brings so many people over a year into the downtown, into the city, into our county. And when you have that draw, suddenly you have people who have eyes on Wabash, who fall in love with our downtown and who fall in love with our city and our county. That has a huge impact, but it also impacts as an anchor. It is an anchor for Market Street. It's an anchor for the downtown. It's a reason for people to come and a reason for them to explore the downtown. Market Street's blessed with a lot of those anchors that have popped up. You have the Beechams, who devoted, out of the kindness of their heart, redoing buildings. One of them is Modoc's and putting in Modoc's, which you'll find me at most days. I love a good coffee meeting. But you also have Market Street Grill, just renovated. Beautiful place. And if it wasn't for Market Street Grill and Modoc's, I probably never would have even imagined coming here or staying here or living here. But you have the museum, and the museum, to me, is a perfect example of downtown Wabash. The museum at one point was a Sears, and that Sears left the downtown to go out, just like Sears and other stores were doing all over the United States at that time. It was much more convenient in their mind to allow themselves to have their own parking. And so they left the downtown. The building was empty for a while. It became some other things. And at some point, it became a museum. And so the Wabash County Museum is an amazing place. I always recommend it to anyone who comes to town. If you're out of town, it was my first place when I came to Wabash, and that impacted me.
What I enjoy is when you drive by the museum and there's school buses along the street.
Oh, yeah.
And they're from Lafayette or Warsaw, right? We're getting young kids that get an experience in Wabash. And that says a lot that they're coming from these little bit larger cities to come to Wabash's museum. So
absolutely. And as interactive as the museum is for the families that do live here, for their kids, is something to do in the heart of our downtown.
I love that you said that, something to do. And that is ultimately one of the biggest advantages of having a thriving downtown, in my opinion. When you are in any place you ever live, if you think about moving to a place, you're always looking, what is there to do there? What can I do on the weekend? What can I do on the weekday? Maybe without even thinking about it, you're also going to think through, if I have friends, family who come visit me, is there stuff that I could have them do that would make them also appreciate the place that I'm living in? In a lot of small towns with the population of Wabash and the surrounding communities, it can be difficult to have a good area of something to do that can take you an entire weekend. It can just something that you can always do and change up. But that's the beautiful part of downtown Wabash. There's a lot of things that you can do. It will take up a weekend. It can take up a week. It can take up a day. But it's always different too. So I think the value in that is impacted not just for the city of Wabash, but the surrounding areas. I think, in my opinion, like, Wabash is our biggest city in the county. It's also the county seat. If the downtown wasn't a good place to go, to visit, to explore, to have your business meetings, to meet with people, that, in my opinion, would impact people's willingness to live in North Manchester, to live in LaFountain. If I live in LaFountain or North Manchester, I can, of course, do things in those communities. At some point in time, after my friend Susie visits me 12 times, I'm like, let's go look at a different area. And the beauty about Wabash County is you don't have to drive far to get to anything really cool. And so you could come to downtown Wabash And there's all these things you can do, but a great thing about the museum is that you can learn more about the history here. And like I said, I'm a huge history fan. I love learning about history. And it's so interesting to me that so much history, so many great people lived, worked, and it all happened right here on 2 streets. That is unfathomable to me in my mind. I never would. You could write that in a book. I could watch that in a movie and I would think it's not real. It's just amazing to me.
Shane, you mentioned that you were on the board of Downtown Wabash Inc., but that's actually changed here recently.
Yes.
What is your current role with the organization?
So right now I am the executive director of Downtown Wabash. I've been in that position since January 15th. Of course, I still do podcasts, clearly. That's still my passion. I love telling stories and helping people tell those stories. I love that, and I will always do that. When the director position opened, I recognized the person who's in that position has a lot of responsibility, but they also have a lot of things that they can do. As a board member, you would meet once a month and then you meet on committees, but it's a oversight role. And the director of downtown has a lot of in-person actions, decisions that they can make that can make great impact. But also what went into that decision was I've become good friends with a lot of the small businesses and medium and large businesses. And the economy is weird right now. And so anytime you have a change in leadership for the nation, it causes some unease. You just don't know what tomorrow will look like, what next year will look like. And I recognize that the most important piece for me in this role is that this person has to have the ability to be successful. They have to be able to support those small businesses. You don't want them to go out. You don't want that effect of decline that can happen quickly when people are scared. And so I knew that we needed someone who could be compassionate, who could be kind, but could be there to help and be there to listen. I don't know how to run a coffee shop. So anytime Kelly tells me, this is what we need, this is what I want, I know she's the perfect person who will exactly know what they need in order to succeed. And so I take all of those pieces that each person tells me when I meet with them and try to figure out how can I make the greatest impact while I'm in this role for the downtown, but more importantly, for those small businesses. I want to see them succeed. And again, as I've said many times, I know what it's like to struggle and to fear and to be in pain. And I also own a small business. And I know the struggles that you have. You're always the person who has to figure it out. The economy is not always great. There are a lot of unknowns that happen. And so in my role, the number one thing that I try to do is make sure that people know, those business owners, managers, the employees know, I'm here for you. Because that's what I would want as a small business owner when times are hard, when it's scary out there, you don't know. And also small businesses, they don't normally have a huge cash flow that they're set for 2 years, no matter how much sales they make. So the success of First Friday events, I knew would be very important. And they were coming up quickly when I took on the role. Big learning experience. When you've never ran an event like that, I volunteered at them. But ultimately, that was the reasoning behind it. I wanted to help. And
we're lucky. And we're lucky that you made that decision to do so. One thing with each of our roles, volunteer and then professionally, I think is great to remember. You've mentioned a lot of the names of benefactors and that kindness that we've been so fortunate to have here in Wabash County, have a history of that. You talk about what Wabash looks like in the future. I think it's what's so important is continuing that momentum as you spoke to. But people that come and experience downtown Wabash, they do feel it, they do get to experience it, but they probably don't know the story of those people and all that they've poured in, the generosity that it's taken to create what Downtown Wabash is today, right? And so for us, just continuing to steward that generational philanthropy, to see those buildings, they do cost a lot, as you mentioned, right? And so to see them, whether it's Charlie Creek Inn, Eagles Theater, the Honeywell Center, the History Museum, Modocs, that takes a lot. And a lot of those projects have brought outside money in to support those. And so Shane, for you now being in a leadership role, first as a resident, a business owner, and then now at Downtown Wabash, what does that look like 10 years from now? What does Downtown Wabash look like as we continue that momentum?
Sure. 10 years from now, I want to see the areas that still need improvement to be improved. It is so expensive, as we spoke about, to restore an old building, but it has to be done. So how can I impact people to make those decisions? It's a huge investment to spend all of that money to put together this building, to restore it. But to do it, for it to be a worthwhile investment, worth that risk, you have to have the knowledge that you can be certain that as soon as you're finished restoring it, you can have a storefront move in, you can rent out the apartments. You have to be able to do all of these things. If you go a year without being able to get that rented, you may go bust, you may go bankrupt. So you have to make the investment worth it. Take away as much risk for them as you can. And so one of them is the revitalization part. I want to see storefronts full, because if I'm trying to get a corner business on Canal, a building restored so that I can get another store in it, the people who will purchase it will take into account the other stores that are nearby. Because as I said, if there's an empty space, your store will hurt from that empty space. It's just knowledge that all store owners have. So I want to see those spaces full, and in 10 years from now, we're not looking at restoring buildings. We're looking at how can we ensure the longevity of what we have now. That's always something that we have to look at. A building can be restored, you can put a lot of money into it, but you have to be able to also have the upkeep and make sure that it stays in a good condition going forward. If not, we'll get back to the situation we were in the 70s and 80s when suddenly buildings declined so much that it takes $500,000 to fully restore it. So that's where I hope that we are in 10 years, at a point to where we've done all this restoration work. Now we're just trying to maintain buildings and also look at how we can progress more. Like I said, I have a pet peeve, and that's when someone says, there's not a lot more we can do here. There's always more we can do here. And I always want to make sure, and I'm pushing that envelope to make sure that we get to that point. I want to keep that momentum going. I think that's super important. We can go so far in 10 years if we have momentum and if we have people believing in it. But the moment that people start questioning, is it worth it? I think it's okay right now. That momentum slides and we'll start going backwards.
Shane, if we have local residents that want to get involved and they want to volunteer with Downtown Wabash Inc., how can they get a hold of you, or where can they find more information?
Downtownwabash.org. The email is info, I-N-F-O, at downtownwabash.org. And what I have done as soon as I took over, I recognize the importance of getting your community involved, getting them to enjoy downtown, but also getting them to feel like they have a piece of it. Not everyone can buy a building. Not everyone can come shop every weekend. It's out of the budget. It would be out of the budget for me for most of my life. So I also want to reach those people who don't have the money to give or don't have the ability or the time to do those pieces, but they're willing to give you a couple hours out of the month and come and be a part of something. And so that's what I want. And so I've been developing, and I've developed a volunteer base of people who can come. If you love First Friday, if you love seeing those events put together, come see what it's like behind the scenes. See how much work goes into it, the decisions that we quickly have to make at a spur of the moment. But you also get to sit back and see the benefit from it. You get to see those people come in for the programming that you've just spent several months creating. you get to see the smile on people's faces, and you get to see people walk from store to store with their bags. That gives you a feeling like, I just can't describe that. But I want those people who are volunteering to love the community, to fall more in love with it. I hear a lot from people who grew up in Wabash, and they really value the downtown, what we have now. There's great memories a lot of people have. The Eagles is a great example. The Eagles Theater, it was almost to a point to where it would have been torn down. And it was for the generosity of the community. A bunch of people got together to save that theater because they had memories, good memories, and they wanted to keep those memories alive and let the next generation have a piece of those memories.
That goes for a lot of the amenities we have here, including the drive-in, another Honeywell-owned feature. But it also, like most small towns, would have lost its drive-in if it weren't for the generosity of local citizens.
That's the story of Wabash, right? Not only downtown Wabash, but Wabash County. And I so appreciate your question, Adam, about how do people get involved and plugged in. And Shane, your answer is because it does take all of us, right? Whether it's you have time, you have money, whatever it is. Where Wabash is today is a direct testament to that, right? It does take all of us in the future. The questions about what the future looks like, it is going to require all of our residents to get on board.
Yeah. And also, we also run the farmers market. And I mentioned before that First Friday has a lot of things going on that you just don't realize. Farmers market's the same way. This year, it looks a little different. It's a little bigger. My hope for the farmers market and First Friday is to see more of those, they call them vendors, but small businesses, these startup businesses, these businesses that they're not big, but they are a small business. I want to see them succeed. I so want to see them succeed. Not just because I want them to have a successful business, but I know in order for me to fill up all these storefronts, I need businesses. And the perfect way to get a small business is to help them develop into the point to where they can have a storefront. And in my mind, the vendors, those small businesses at farmers market and who will be coming on First Friday events, that's a great segue for them to eventually lead into a storefront space. I can say all day that I want these storefronts to be filled, but unless I take small actions to help get people to that point, we would never have them filled. So
I appreciate you sharing your vision there, Shane. I think it's all of us, right? We go to an event or we go into a store downtown or we get to go to a program of Downtown Wabash or any other organization. And we enjoy that, right? We enjoy that experience, but oftentimes we don't get to see the bigger picture. And so by you sharing your vision of how the farmers market that's on one side of downtown is part of a bigger piece is really cool.
Yeah. And the farmers market's also pulling people to downtown. So they're still shopping and doing other things downtown, which is also why we have volunteers for farmers market. We want people in the community to love that market. We want them to love working and experience what it's like to work with so many small businesses in a short period of time. There's a lot of things that you have to help and you have to work through, but it's such a successful feeling when you get to see the finished result and see people enjoy that market. And it's also a great way to support the local farmers in the community. They're businesses of their own. And if they have a bad year, that really is impactful. And in a time when you see less and less farmer families, I feel like the farmers market is the perfect way to ensure that those farmers in our community has a greater benefit for them, a greater impact. And then also, I also want people in the community to value them. So I want to see them out there, and I want you to be able to see the name of the farm and the business and realize that this is fresh produce that you can't get other places in the county. And I feel like that's so important as someone who went through periods of time without food and lived through poverty. I didn't know how to use that produce. And so I love going to the farmer's market every Saturday and seeing produce that I've never used before and buying it. And I'm going to figure out how to use this.
And we all know that the tomatoes that you buy at the farmer's market or the cucumbers or the lettuce, taste completely different
Yes.
than the ones you buy at the store. They've been
Yes.
harvested a lot of times the day of or the day before, and you're eating the freshest and the ripest there is. I had the privilege of interviewing the Cordis family with Cordis Berry Farms. And if you haven't listened to that episode, go back a few and check that out. But we talk about the flavors of the strawberries and the blackberries that they grow. And if you're eating them right from the vine, how different that experience is.
100%. Same way with all the sweets they have at the farmer's market, which I took home with me last week. They have some crazy stuff there. It's so good. But a fresh cookie is so much better than one that's packaged. 100%.
100%.
Same way with the strawberries.
Shane, I have two final quick questions for you. First, if somebody's not been to Downtown Wabash, somebody listening outside of the community, what's the one thing you could tell them about Downtown Wabash or Wabash County?
I would tell them about what I love most about Wabash, and that's the people. But not just the people who live here now, also the people who lived here before. We have a lot of really important people who once lived here, a lot of really cool history that for me, and I feel like other people as well, further hook them to our community. We have the man who invented the Yellow Pages, worked out of downtown Wabash. Just out of the downtown, there was the old General Tire factory. One day, this lady was on her lunch break, and she wrote her sister a song. And that sister was Loretta Lynn, and it was her first hit song, Don't Come Home A-Drinkin' with Lovin' on Your Mind. That happened here, and if it wasn't for that song, I don't know what would have happened to Loretta Lynn's career. It was her first hit, but that happened right here in our town. There's so many stories like that. Another one is the person, without this person who lived here in Wabash, we would not have gotten the polio vaccine. They lived here. How cool is that? That is so impactful. So beyond just we are the first electrically lighted city in the world, crazy good story. But we had all of these other people who came along and did amazing things that impacts all of us to this day happen right here in our small community. And so the ability for me to say my favorite thing is the people of Wabash, it's also the people who once lived here, who once called Wabash home. That's what makes Wabash great to me. The feeling that I received that day when I came here for a history story is because of the people of Wabash. Wabash is nothing without the people. Wabash would be nothing today without people who invested in the community, who wanted to see future generations be able to enjoy what we're enjoying today. So when I say I love the people of Wabash, that's why I love the people of Wabash.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that, Shane.
Yeah.
Is we're still learning and new to the Thrive in Wabash County podcast. You've already provided so much insight and guidance and advice like we've talked about for us and on this journey. But I feel like we need to ask you, being that you're probably going to be the most successful podcaster that we'll have on the show, what's one more piece of advice you have for us as we continue this journey?
Be true to yourself. There are thousands of shows, and it's very easy to hear or watch another show and think, I want to do what they're doing. I think that's a great idea. Let me do what they're doing. But you will lose your identity by doing that. Same way, if you think about it, for you as an individual. I love the both of you. If I try to do things that you are doing, I will lose my identity and my brand. And that's ultimately true with podcasts as well. If you see something you like, sure, try it, see if it goes along with what you're trying to do. But find your brand, find your lane, and find value in that. There's always going to be ideas that come to you. How can I change? How can I improve? But always think, is that my brand that I want? And hopefully that will be the decision making that you have. Never be or never feel like you're not yourself, you're not genuine, because those who are listening right now will tell you that's so important. That's why they're sticking around to the end of this episode, because they're bought in, just like we want people to be bought into our community. In order to do that for a podcast, you have to be genuine.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for all the advice and direction you've given us. I have one last question for you. If you're not busy in the studio recording a podcast, or if you're not at Downtown Wabash Inc. or one of the First Friday events, you've got a couple hours to yourself. What are you doing in Wabash County?
I have a 5-month-old Cavapoo puppy named Betty White. I named her Betty White because of the Golden Girls, my grandmother. So what I'm doing now is finding places that I can take her. We have a beautiful dog park downtown. We have beautiful parks in the city. I love now being able to go out to other communities in the county and take her on walks in places that we've never been. So I enjoy all those pieces. I also have a great friends group here in Wabash, and it's so valuable to me to spend quality time with friends. So I really enjoy going to the restaurants, the shows, all of those things that we have here. I also enjoy biking. I love going out to our trails that we have. Absolutely amazing. And I feel like every year with the expansion of them, they just get further and further and better. And I can spend more of my afternoon on those trails. And that's, for me, a me time. Some people like to do massages and those type of things. For me, I want to be alone, but I want to be able to do something. And so those trails provide that to me.
Shane, we're so lucky that you chose to call Wabash County home and bring all of your experiences and your story. Thank you for sharing today, and has shaped you into the person that you are and leader within our community. So we're just grateful that you're here and fortunate. And there will be people 10 years, 20 years from now that are reaping the benefits of the work that you do every day in our community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Shane. Glad to call you a friend.
This is a Destination Wabash County podcast. A huge thank you goes out to our sponsors who make this possible: the City of Wabash, the Gilman Investment Fund, the Sandra Kunkel Trust, Paperworks Industries, the Community Foundation of Wabash County, and Visit Wabash County.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Who was the last person to wear these, Christine? These things are like made for a child.
I think you're dialed in. Okay.
You're dialed in.
Dialed.
Dialed in. Now, how do I look? You got to make me look good. I don't care how both of you look.